Right, so I mentioned the policy layer. So let me explain what I mean by that. When we launched the site, our first task was to simply get all the knowledge of the existing knowledge services and get them all into one site. And at the time, I was pulled into this project because the idea behind Knowledge for Policy to begin with was as follows. We knew that we had scientists, and on the other hand, we have policymakers. We have to try to bring them together. We know that scientists will work together in communities of practice because they've been doing this for a long time. The idea is, or was, wouldn't it be great if we could get the policymakers to join those communities? That would bring them together. They'd be able to have a conversation online. You know, communities can be very much a flavor of the month, and that month is quite a long one. But to be honest, I was not the only one who was just a bit skeptical about whether that would actually work. So whilst we built the beta version of the site, we commissioned some audience research. And we were the first people to do this, as far as we know. We looked first to see whether somebody else had done this audience research, and we didn't find any. So we had an online survey, we had 12 ethnographic interviews and 3 focus groups. It was quite good quality work. And the results are available online. What this audience research showed us is it really showed up the key disconnects between these two worlds. For a start, there's the disconnect around time. Scientists, will say, you want an answer? Give me $1 million in 2 years and you get an answer. But the policymaker wants the answer tomorrow or by next week. There's a huge difference in terms of language and the level of detail that they're interested in. And in terms of whether they would actually join communities, the scientists would join communities, and they would really love to see policymakers being part of those communities because it would give them some feedback that the world of policy is actually using their research results. But the policymakers said, no, it would be very unlikely that I would actually write down on a public website that I didn't know something or I did know something. We prefer to keep things off the record. So that was a big blow to the idea of bringing online communities together with scientists and policymakers joining in. So we have this wall between these two worlds, and this wall is built using different bricks about time, about content, and about attitudes towards interactivity. So we realized we needed to build a site where on the one hand, we would be developing interfaces for scientists and a different set of interfaces for policymakers. We knew that we could build communities of practice and the scientists would join. The policymakers would not, but what they did want to do was talk to scientists. Rather than being part of an online community, they would say, find me somebody to talk to. So if we could convene Europe or worldwide communities of scientists over months and years, because it takes a long time to build up a community. If we could do that, that would give us a pool of people who could answer those questions at short notice by the policymakers. We also discovered that some policymakers in some circumstances would join communities of practice, but only if it was a closed working group where they trusted everybody and the outside world couldn't see inside. We knew the scientists would definitely love the whole granular knowledge management and searching for information, which is why we developed this taxonomic architecture I mentioned earlier, but the policymakers would not. They would not do searches of databases. We would need to create dedicated content for them and then do dedicated outreach to get it to them. So these dedicated content and these interfaces for policymakers are what we call the policy layer. We would need more than a website as well. We would need to have, alongside the website, community managers who would convene these communities of scientists and interface them to the world of policy. We would need to have a content partnership between the subject matter experts who understand the science and people who can actually create this content, process it for policymakers. We would call that now knowledge brokerage. And finally, capacity building. One of the very few things that both worlds had in common was a desire to understand how the other world worked. Policymakers want to know more about how science works and vice versa. So there's a role to play here in terms of capacity building to burrow tunnels through that wall and help these two worlds connect. So we came up with an information architecture for the site based on the knowledge pyramid, which is incredibly simplistic and derided and out of date. We know that. But the big advantage of the knowledge pyramid is everybody understands it. So we've essentially got a website where there's a set of useful services for scientists like communities of practice and highly granular knowledge management. And that's sort of, they're focused on the lower half of the pyramid. And then there should be another set of interfaces and services focused on policymakers and policy advisors in the upper half of the pyramid. So that's basically the audience research that we had by the time we finished the beta phase, and we'd migrated all the knowledge services into this platform. And when we did that, we had a big database full of information and data, but we didn't have anything on top. We didn't have that layer for the policymakers, so we started building that.